Now we must be wondering about Frank, her husband. He gets into his own trouble. Teddy wasn't at the apartment. He'd gone out early in the morning and hadn't come back. Frank's fists clenched and unclenched rapidly as he walked away from the building. The tic, which had always become more agitated when he was in a violent mood, flashed across his cheek like a neon sign. The three men who had been watching Teddy's apartment from a car parked across the street apparently did not see those outward warning signs of the violent anger seething inside Frank Markham. All they saw was opportunity. They hadn't caught Teddy Leung at home, but his partner would do as well. One man got out and followed on foot. The car drove slowly past the two men walking. It turned into the shopping plaza at the end of the block and parked. The other two men got out and walked back around the corner to meet their prey. By that time, Frank was almost up to the narrow service alley that ran behind the plaza. When he noticed the two Chinese in dark business suits walking toward him, it was too late to do anything but see what they wanted. Dr. Markham? The older one, a man of about 50 with a nasty scar across his cheek, spoke. The other, who looked to be in his mid-20s, stood back with a sharp eye for the street. They wanted no witnesses. Frank drew a deep breath and decided to play along for now. Yes? He half turned and glanced behind him. Another young Chinese was walking down the street behind him. No escape in that direction, he thought. We would like to talk to you. About? I think you know. Probably not. Who the hell are you guys? You can call me Jimmy Lee. You do know who we are and what we want. Go to hell. Jimmy Lee hardly nodded, but the men with him understood and moved to grab Frank's arms. The anger inside him had reached full boil and he swung around violently. His knee smashed into the groin of the man who had followed him. It was not enough. As Frank swung around, Jimmy Lee had hit him hard enough to stagger him. Jimmy and the other man grabbed his arms and steered him into the alley. Get up, Jimmy Lee snapped in disgust to the man, still rolling on the ground in pain. The man stumbled to his feet and staggered into the alley after them. The closed end of the alley was ideal for Jimmy Lee's purpose. Neither the shopping plaza nor the apartment building behind it had windows facing the alley. A large garbage bin halfway down the alley blocked most of the view from the street. Jimmy Lee slammed Frank's back against the brick wall, then smashed him hard in the solar plexus. Frank doubled over in pain just in time for the other man to plow his fist into Frank's face. The third man, still obviously in great pain, hobbled up and hit Frank in the side, just below the ribcage. Frank slid down the bricks until he was in a half-crouching, half-sitting position, looking up at his tormentors. Jimmy Lee smiled. He said something in Cantonese that Frank was in too much pain to understand. The man Frank had hurt hobbled back to the garbage bin, where he could keep an eye on the street. The other man stepped back a bit and warily watched the exit doors to the stores. Now, said Jimmy Lee, maybe we should talk. Fuck you. You do not want to live long, said Jimmy Lee, and kicked Frank hard enough in the chest to loudly smash his head into the brick wall. Frank slumped to the ground. Wake him, Jimmy snapped the words out in Cantonese. This white man was making him angry. Jimmy Lee did not like to be angry. The man nearest him knelt and brought Frank around. Jimmy Lee crouched in front of Frank. You do not know who you're dealing with, he hissed angrily. As much as he could under the circumstances, Frank smiled, the muscles near the corner of his mouth twitching frantically. Go, Shadow, he whispered in Cantonese. Then in English, fuck you, bastard. The two younger men moved toward them, but Jimmy Lee motioned them back. His teeth were clenched and the anger filled him, so he knew it must show in his eyes. All his training had been for discipline, for self-control. Anger was a lack of control. There was no winning in a situation one could not control. The white devil, beaten and brought down, was still glaring at him defiantly. His wife had seemed to draw her strength from fear. Markham's strength came from something much more terrible. There was no fear in those eyes, only anger, deep, intense anger born of some inner hatred. He would get nothing from Frank Markham today. He leaned in close to the man's face. You will tell us. You have 2 days. Frank spit in his face. Jimmy Lee stood up. He smiled, then kicked Frank as hard as he could in the chest. He took out a handkerchief and wiped off his face. 2 days, he hissed as he turned and walked toward the street end of the alley. He motioned, and the other two followed him to the car.